Hey now, Brawlers, it's time for another Board Game Brawl review with Nick Minahan, sponsored by BoardGameBliss.com. Hey now, today we're going to take a look at Avarium Academy from Chain Links Games. Now, this entire game is one gigantic anime trope by design. It's that classic story of you've got these new kids who have come to the school and they want to take over and become the student council president. In this case, they're called idols, and they're all like much more powerful than any of the other students, and of course they are warring with each other, and they are trying to recruit all of the other students at the school from all these different factions and clubs to come to their side. There's a lot of different anime like this. I could rattle some of them off, but it's sort of the classic thing, and it's got that. Consequently, the artwork style in this game is anime style. Is very well done. I'll talk about that more in my final thoughts, but the style of gameplay here is sort of head-to-head, almost Magic the Gathering with a bit of card drafting, so to speak. You're actually recruiting different students from a recruitment pile into your class in order to gain control of them and use their abilities, and you want to wage combat with the other players, but you also have your own particular win condition that you are trying to meet. So there's a couple, actually 3 different ways the game could potentially end. Let me go ahead and give you a brief overview of how the game is played, then we're going to come back. I'll let you know what I think. Alright, I'm going to give you a brief overview of Avarium Academy. This is a game primarily for 2 players. You can play it in 4-player multiplayer mode, though, and sort of, it's still free-for-all, but you can kind of help each other out if you want to, and lend support to other players during combat. But this overview is going to assume a 2-player game. Each player takes control of a different candidate for, or an idol at this high school called Avarium Academy, and you're trying to be a candidate for a student council president, and you need to take out all of your competition. Now, there's a few different ways that the game is going to end. One of the ways is if you knock down all of your opponent's merit points. Now, each of the idol cards that you're going to have in front of you, and I'll cover this more in detail later, is going to have a merit score, and you'll actually keep track of that with this little tracker here. If that ever reaches 0, you are out of the game. In a 2-player game, that means that your opponent instantly wins. Now, the other way that your opponent, that you may win the game, is with your win condition, special win condition. So underneath your picture here, you have a special condition. This one for Hatsurugi Toka says, attack and expel enemy delinquents in, 4 enemy delinquents in 1 turn. Whereas the opponent that I have in this scenario, Amoeba, has the condition of attack and expel 4 enemy paragons in 1 turn. So these 2 characters are sort of arch nemesis. If you can meet that condition, whatever it happens to be, and sometimes the condition happens at the start of a turn, at the end of the turn, or happens immediately, you will immediately win the game, but of course that's a bit easier said than done. The last way that the game can end is if the school pile runs out. So these are the school cards. If that deck ever runs out of cards, then the game is going to end. And at that point, whoever has the most merit is going to be the winner of the game. In other words, merit is sort of like hit points in this game, and whoever has the most at that point will be the winner. Alright, other bits of setup you need to do at the start of the game. First off, you need to make your school. You're going to shuffle up the school deck, and you're going to put 6 random students out into the courtyard. I'm going to come back to that and talk about that in more detail. Then you have the library deck. You're going to shuffle those up, and you're going to deal 2 of those cards out to each player randomly. Each player is going to get a couple of cheat sheet cards telling you how the turns are going to go and how fighting would work. And then we'll go back and talk about our idol cards. Now, there's several different idol cards in the game. They all have their own different win condition, their own different merit scores. Also, just to go over some of the other things here, the symbols up in the top corner of the card, we can zoom in a little bit there, will tell you the gender and also potential club that they belong to. Then this is the amount of reputation, which are these marks here, that you're going to gain at the start of each turn. So I actually already gave each of the opponents the reputation they have coming to them for the start of the turn. Whoever is going second, by the way, at the start of the game gets an extra couple of reputation to make up for the benefit, the deficit there. This I already mentioned is the merit, which is essentially your life points. This is how much combat damage you can potentially deal when combat breaks out. That's your special win condition. And here's all of your different special abilities that may happen or may not happen depending on the situation. So, for instance, for Hatsuru Gituka here, the cost of paragons that she recruits are reduced by 1 as far as reputation goes. All of your students get +1 to combat, and at the cost of 1 reputation, you can target a neutral in class. Target neutral is also delinquent until the end of turn. So her whole thing is about taking out delinquents, so she makes it easier to force a neutral student to take a side. Now, as you might imagine, each different idol is going to have different special abilities. I'm not going to go over all of them, but I do want to show you the other idols because I think some of them are amusing in the different anime tropes. So I'll tell you their win condition as well. So you have Luvarius Love. Let's scan in. Luvarius Love, who, as you might imagine, his goal is to start the turn with 5 or more females in his class. Your classroom area is the area in front of you where you keep all of your students. You have Peppermint Kitty, and her goal is to start her turn with 20 or more reputation. So he just wants to get as much money as she possibly can, so to speak. Then you have Kumara Raj. His goal is to start the turn with 35 or more merit. So he wants to have as many hit points, if you want to think of it in those terms. You have Shioko. Shioko's goal is to, if the player on your right wins, which can lead to some very interesting and awkward situations. You have Sierra Coral. Her win condition is that you start your turn with 5 or more students in your class. And Sebastian Wolfgang, his is empty the school. So if he can force the game to end by emptying the school, that is going to force him to win, which is very, very interesting. And then you have Hasenmeyer Hojo. I'm sure I'm butchering some of these names. His condition is capture 6 students under me, which is him, which is part of his special abilities here. All right, let me show you the other cards in the game. There are school cards and there are library cards, which are actually technically called scheme cards. So let's go over the school cards, the student cards first, just to show you an idea of what you might come across in the deck. It looks somewhat similar to the idol cards, but not quite. Up in the top corner, this is how much reputation you have to spend in order to actually recruit this person into your class. And you're allowed to have a maximum of 5 students in your class aside from your idol at any point. Then it has their gender and such. Over here is how much combat they have and how much defense. Now the creeper is a bit weird. You might notice those numbers look really high. That's because and they always refer to things in the first person in the text here. So it says, my combat and defense are reduced by 2 for each other student in your class. So the more students you have, the weaker that he gets. The punching bag only costs you 2, and he has 0 combat and 5 defense. When I fight alone, exhaust all enemy students involved in the fight at the end of that fight. Exhausting is the same as tapping. They just can't legally use that word. Androgynous Lure. He's one of the question mark gendered characters, as you might imagine. When I join your class, put target male or female student in the courtyard into your class. So straight from the buy stack there. Yeah, I'm not going to read all the abilities, but just to show you these because some of them are kind of funny. You have the Scandalous Fangirl who has the I Love BL and Shonen magazines here. What could those possibly mean? I have no idea, I assure you. Champion of Hide and Seek. I just think that's a funny card. Amazoness, Whipping Boy. That makes me laugh. The Eager Student, which don't read too much into that. The Terabad Artist and the Overly Attached Senior. Not all the cards are that objectively ridiculous, but those are some of the ones I liked. All right, now let's cover these scheme cards. And the scheme cards are kind of like spells you can use, and they can be used at different times. I'll cover all that in a minute when I take you through the turn order. Some of them, like this card here, the Prefix in Intervention is a surprise, meaning you can play it out of turn. You don't have to play it on your particular turn. Now, these have a reputation cost as well, but here's an important note about this. Now, typically when you spend reputation, you have to physically spend your reputation tokens that you've been accumulating. But in the case of schemes, you can actually exhaust students in order to cast your schemes, which means that you have to exhaust, tap, and therefore take out of the round, essentially, a student whose reputation cost is at least as much as the scheme cost. So it's a way for you to quickly get schemes out into play. The Prefix Intervention actually just shuts down a fight as it's about to happen, and no damage is dealt. It just shuts that whole thing down. Persuasive Recruitment. you put target student with recruit cost equal to 3 or less from the courtyard into your hallway. The hallway, by the way, is a spot on your board that's kind of like the temporary holding zone. So when you recruit a student, you don't get them right away into your class to be able to use on that same turn. They come at the end of the turn. So that's why that card referenced that. You have Rage of the Geek. This is a surprise, which is going to increase your combat power. Again, I don't want to read every single one of these. Food poisoning is a surprise that will essentially clear out the courtyard, which makes sense. The Roaring Passion will also increase your combat during a fight. Checkup Day is going to, as a surprise card, that will exhaust all students in all classes of a certain gender of your choice. Stand in the Hallway, which is one of those tropes of anime that I've never seen in America at all, period. But standing in the hall with a bucket just is always amusing. So let me take you through the turn, and I'll explain other details as they come up. First thing you do, during your start phase, you'll determine the start player, then you're going to take your turn. During your start phase, determine whether or not you win the game, meaning if you've met your win condition or not. Then you unexhaust any potential students that you have in your class or your main character, gain whatever reputation you have coming to you, and then you get to draw a scheme card. Then you move on to the planning phase, which I prefer to call the main phase, because this is where you can just do stuff until you no longer want to do stuff, or you can no longer have the resources to do that. Primarily, you can recruit, which, as I already mentioned, is spending the appropriate recruitment costs in order to take someone from the courtyard and then put them into your hallway. Now, you do not replenish the courtyard right away. That's not going to happen until the end of your turn. Now, as soon as you take one of the students from the courtyard, you immediately replace it. So there should always be 6 cards out there whenever anyone is making a decision, but they're still going to go into your hallway, and you're not going to get them until your end phase, unless you have some sort of special ability going on. Then have at it. Another thing you can do is play your scheme cards. As much as you have a reputation for, or as many students as you want to exhaust to use them, you can use the scheme cards as they apply on your turn. You'll typically want to save the ones that say surprise. And the last thing you can do during the planning phase is kind of the crux of the game, which is combat. So let's say that I have Hatsurugi Tora here, and a couple turns have gone by, and I have accrued a little force of Paragons here, and I have decided that I want to make a play to take out my opponent. Well, at this point, I would decide to declare an attack. Now, this is one of those things where you can declare as many attacks as you want, but once someone declares an attack, they have to become exhausted, and they're going to be essentially out of the round. So you can make multiple attacks, but not if you use everybody, if that makes kind of sense. Fights can be a little bit tricky, so kind of stay with me here. I'm just going to give you a broad overview of how they're going to work. You're going to choose a leader. One of your people that you're choosing to attack with is going to be your point, to turn a phrase. Who is going to be attacking one of the targets on the other side of the field. So let me just do this, just so I can give you an example. There's a delinquent. Perfect. So here's the fighting force that we're going up against. You wouldn't put them out like this. I'm just doing this for the sake of the camera. So I decided I'm going to attack that idol. I'm just going to go all out. I'm going to attack the idol. I don't have to, but I'm going to go ahead and do that. And these 2 characters are going to support my main leader. The person that I'm choosing to attack on the defense becomes the leader of that team, and they can choose to add people into support as well. They don't have to, though, because if they choose to do so, then it's going to exhaust those cards on both sides. So they may decide, well, I don't really want to do that now in order to prep myself for future attacks. So what you'll do at that point, before you get through that part of the phase, combat's broken down into different separate phases. I'm not really going to go into all the detail, but it's broken down to where you have one last shot to use any scheme cards or special ability from your characters that might influence the battle. Once that is done, then you tabulate the total combat from all of your people and the total combat from all of the defense, and then you apply it to each other. You always have to apply all of your damage to the leaders of each team first, and you are not allowed to deal any damage to the other players or the other students in the combat until you've ripped through that leader. Then, when you've done that, you can apply the damage to the students. They have a defense rating. If you're able to meet or beat that defense rating, they're gone. They go into the expelled pile because no one really dies in this world, we'll say, I guess, and that's that. So let's say that in this particular case, we decided not to attack with our idols, because that is kind of stupid. Because you want to protect your idols so they don't die and you lose the game. So those leaders die, or those were the two leaders, the students. They're going to die and kill each other, and then I have a lot more combat for whatever reason, and I go ahead and I deal, because I have a Paragon boost here. So the defense isn't able to kill any more of my people, but I'm able to deal more damage to either the idol of the other class or the student, and I'll say, well, let's just take out that student. I don't care. And then maybe I get to deal 2 more merit damage to my opponent, which they will mark down as such. Oh, and I do want to clarify, you'll never exhaust your idol. It's only the other students that will. But anyways, after that, you're going to clean up. Anyone who's exhausted is going to be exhausted. Anyone who was killed / expelled is going to be expelled, and that's that. Now, once you get done doing all of this stuff that you want to do on your turn, recruiting, playing schemes, attacking, then you just simply go to the cleanup, to the end phase part of your turn. You put all the students who you recruited in the hallway into your class, up to a maximum of 5. Then you, if you want to, you can expel students. If you want to put new students there, then you're stuck with ones you don't want anymore. If you have more than 5 scheme cards in your hand, you have to discard down. And then I should mention that you use these attack tokens to show who you've attacked with, because even if you don't exhaust someone, once they've made an attack for the turn, that's it. They can still potentially defend themselves, but that's all they can do. They can't declare any attacks. And that's it. That is Avarium Academy. I probably missed some little things in there, but that's a general overview of the game. Now, let's get to my final thoughts. First off, I love the overall presentation and appearance of Avarium Academy. The only physical components I don't like that much are the little tokens for reputation, which are just like cheap and one-sided. The board actually looks good, but it doesn't stay flat that well. I'm scared to bend it the other way, and it might break. But it's still okay once you get all the cards on it. It's fine. And the little spinners, the life spinners that you use to keep track of your merit, are really cheap as well. Although the fact that they're even in there at all, I'm kind of happy with. They could have just said, keep track on a piece of paper, or keep track with a D20 that you have laying around. So I like that it's at least there. But the artwork in the game I love, because of course I'm a sucker for anime-style artwork, so that was an easy sell for me personally. But, there's a lot of games that do anime style that it's actually done poorly. And in this case, there's several different artists that they've used for this game, and I like them all. I think they're all good to varying degrees, and I think the presentation is very well done. I like the idol cards, especially because they made them gold foil. They didn't have to, but they just went ahead and did it. So I dig that, and I think it's done pretty well. And as far as the theme goes, as I mentioned in my intro, the whole trope of the people vying for student council president and trying to recruit all these students from different clubs, I like that. I mean, I think that's probably overdone in anime at this point, but I still dig it, and I think it comes across pretty well here. And the whole cast of characters, and not just the idols, which are funny in and of themselves, but all the different students that you come across who, again, are all tropes in and of themselves, like the fangirl who's into boys love manga, and the overbearing senior, and all these different things, the whipping boy. I mean, a lot of them are very funny, and a lot of them are not that funny, but again, they're tropes of anime, like the tennis player and the hunk and all that stuff. So I appreciated seeing all that, and they all have powers that are pretty thematic to what their role is, like the punching bag character and things like that, and the people who can have a different effect depending on what gender of characters that they're interacting with. So I really appreciated that. And in fact, mechanically speaking, I think, but just to sum that up, I think the theme is pretty strong in this game. And I think that mechanically speaking, my favorite aspects of the game, and something that I haven't seen in a lot of games like this, and when I say like this, I would compare Avarium Academy pretty strongly to any kind of head-to-head card game like Magic. Magic is the one, that's probably not the last time I'll mention that during these final thoughts. It's probably the one I think about the most as far as how the combat goes, and of course there's many, many other games who sort of ape those kind of combat conditions, and combat is the central part of this game, so that's the main comparison. But what this game does differently that I like a lot is the whole recruitment of students and how that works, as far as grabbing them from the central pile, and you both get to see what you and your opponents, or opponents, we'll talk more about that in a minute, get to see what's out there and pick them, and then go into your hallway. You don't get them right away, but you can plan for future turns, and you're limited in the classroom that you have and how many students you can have. So, and you also need to keep in track of your condition, because a lot of the idol's conditions for winning have to do with the students that are in your class. You want to focus on either you want to focus on getting a particular type of student and take out students of another type from your opponent, or you want to get a certain amount of females if you're that Luvarius love person, things like that. So I just dig that part. I think that that's an interesting way, sort of card drafting in a sense, to get students into, or to get character cards that I haven't really seen in these type of head-to-head games before. I'm not a fan of the scheme cards. I think that one of the problematic elements of this game is the sort of take-that-y elements to it. I know that's kind of a buzzword in gaming that people overuse a lot, and I probably can be accused of that too, but I do think that the problem with this game, as opposed to other games that have take-that elements, like Magic the Gathering, by the way, is that in those games, it can be kind of tough to pull those off, and you have to use valuable resources to get that done. This game, it's pretty easy. You can have some pretty devastating scheme cards for very low reputation cost, and because of the fact that you can exhaust your students to cast those scheme cards, cast them, quote unquote, it's even easier to get them out. And while I actually think that's an interesting idea, to be able to exhaust your creatures in order to use your spells, it makes it too easy to just totally jack up someone's turn. And I think in this game, there's a potential that once someone gets ahead, they're going to stay ahead. Once you've lowered your opponent's merit to a certain point, assuming that that's the way that you're going to win the game, it's very difficult to come back from that. And if you clear them out of students while you still have 3 or 4 especially fresh students, forget about it. So when you have these cards that can be seemingly innocuous from the scheme pile, used at the right time, that can just devastate your opponent, like cancel an attack that they put their all into, or just make them exhaust one of their students at a completely inopportune time. Those kind of things can just be a little bit too take that for my particular taste. And also, I would say, I'll just get this out of the way now, the only other issue I have with the game is just about the combat, because it feels highfalutin. You pick a leader, and then your leader, you target someone in particular, then those your rest of your students lend you their support, potentially. And that's interesting, but what it really comes down to is Magic the Gathering, declare attackers, declare defenders, and that's that. And just combine all their strength and attack power. And it just wasn't as interesting as I would have wanted it to be. In fact, I think that's where the theme of the game sort of breaks down for me. I might have liked to have had some sort of fun anime-style combat elements happen into it, instead of just add up your attack, add up your defense, let's see who comes out on top with this. So that's a bit problematic for me. But I do think that the other elements of the game overshadow that in a good way. I think that the recruitment aspect of the game, the theme, the very strong theme of all the different character cards, the win condition element is probably the most interesting aspect to me outside of the whole recruitment of characters. And because it's much more fun to win that way. It's like you have these achievements and goals. Frankly, I would have liked to have seen more of that kind of stuff. This is totally going off the rails here, but for me, this type of game, I think, would be better served cutting out the traditional combat elements altogether and having it straight down to getting these type of goal cards and things that would be like with all these different anime elements, and just going for achievement points and victory points, and maybe making combat a small part of that. But I just feel like a lot of that thematic flavor gets wasted when you get to this really traditional kind of dull combat that I just wasn't into that much. But still, I like that quite a bit. The different characters and their different special abilities. Everyone felt very distinct and different, the different idols. I'd love to see an expansion with even more idols potentially, to just throw more variety into the mix. But overall, I think it's a solid game. It just needs a little bit of work in those couple of areas. But I still enjoyed it for what it is. And there's not enough good anime-themed games. This isn't based on a particular anime that I know of. But I dug the theme quite a bit. So, of course, I'm going to grade it a bit more on a curve in that particular regard, as people would probably guess who are familiar with my channel. But either way, I enjoyed it quite a bit. If you ever have a chance to give it a shot, I'd love to know what you think, and know if maybe the elements of the game that I didn't like as much, I'm sure are going to appeal very strongly to other people, and vice versa. It just seems to be that kind of game. Oh, and also I was struggling to remember something I still wanted to mention, so I was kind of stalling for time there. The game plays well at both 2 players and 3 or 4 players. Not both. At those 3 player counts, I've tried it each 3 ways. There's pluses and minuses to both. I think as a 2-player game, it's tighter and faster. But when you go to 3 or 4 players, the objectives, the player objectives, get much more interesting. And since that's kind of one of my favorite parts of the game, that I sort of lend myself more to the multiplayer experience, because now you're constantly keeping track of whether people are trying to win their win condition, and combat becomes a little less frequent because people kind of want to hunker down and work on those conditions. And that I found a little more interesting. But again, 2-player games are tighter and faster, so there is a trade-off. But that is Avarium Academy. Pretty interesting game. Check it out if you ever can. Thanks for watching. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Patreon. And make sure to check out our sponsor, Board Game Bliss, where you can find an amazing selection of games from around the world. BoardGameBliss.com. Thanks for your support.